I think we should.
In order, and I guess we'll start introductions. We'll start down there.
I'm Jackie Yeagle, and I'm with the Municipal Clerk's Office.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk's Office.
Dennis Wheeler, project manager for the Clerk's Vote by Mail project.
Amanda Moser, Clerk's Office.
Pete Peterson, Chairman.
Forrest Dunbar, Assembly.
Rosella Young, Assembly Council Office.
Great. Well, thanks for everyone for coming today. And I've got a little note here from the Board of Ethics that I'll read. They don't have anyone here at the meeting today. They're sending their apologies. As an update, the board is plowing through the rewrite, been meeting nearly every week to make sure we get a draft to us as soon as possible. If we have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to contact David Nesbitt or Dee in the legal department. So we're hoping maybe next month that we'll get a draft that they can run through with us. I think that's the plan. So unless there's any comments or anything about that, we'll go on to the next item on our agenda. And that would be a vote by mail update. And so, Mr. Wheeler, I guess you have the floor.
Thank you. So, there's a lot going on right now, particularly with respect to contracting with vendors for all the different elements of the project. We are trying to get the contracts solidified so that we can get them signed off before purchasing closes requisitions for the year, which comes up in November. So, contract number 1, which is the envelope intake sorter machine that verifies signatures. That contract is priced out at about $592,000, including 2 years worth of warranty and licensing. It has a separate component for another 5 years of licensing, which is going to be subject to a future appropriation. That contract, because it's over $500,000, will come to the assembly in the form of an AM when that's ready. So right now we have the requisition form, the memo to purchasing in the works. We'll provide 3 signed copies to purchasing when the contract is ready. Purchasing, we'll put that on your agenda for the first meeting in November. That's the target date. I just talked to Josie in purchasing about that, so that'll be coming. They will look to deliver that machine in June. We didn't want them to deliver, because we're not using it for the April 2017 election, because of the scheduling and timing for that machine to be built and custom configured in terms of software. As I told the body before, it wouldn't be here in time to use it for the April election. So rather than take delivery, say in April or March or May, somewhere where we would be ready to set it up, test it, configure it, use it, we've asked them to deliver it in June, so it's beyond your election cycle, so the clerk's office will have more time to devote to the actual testing and making sure it's ready to go. So that's the plan for that one.
And that, interestingly, that timeline is kind of consistent with the prior timeline. We were looking at a signed contract in August for delivery in February, and now we're looking at a signed contract in November for delivery in May. So it's that 6 months, it's the same 6 months that we need for the lead time for them to build and develop the equipment and software for us.
Exactly. The second contract, which is the second half of the election process, and that's the scanning the ballots themselves and tabulating them. That contract is also in the same status in terms of being ready to go to purchasing. We're wrapping up contracting negotiations right now. That price is about $250,000. That one will not come to the assembly because it's under the assembly's $500,000 threshold. We just had a kickoff meeting today with the vendor, and we set out a tentative project schedule for that. So we're looking at delivery of hardware in January, and then we'll have a 2-stage software load. The second load will include their latest submittal to the federal certification agency for election systems. And so we'll be taking that software in February, and we'll be doing some initial training and then final acceptance and more training in terms of actually using the system will come later. Later could be either timed with the April 2018 election, or if there's an opportunity for some other sort of special election between now and then, we can utilize it for that. So I don't know if you want to speak to the September idea, but that's one opportunity.
Right. We were thinking of, Amanda suggested a school election, like a youth election, or some type of a test of the equipment in the fall. And so we would really like to do something. We've brought up the date, Constitution Day is September 17th, and it's a mandatory day for schools to do some education. We could have something related to that on the ballot. One other thing that I wanted to comment about RFP number 2 is that the vendor will be here during AML, and they're going to have a demonstration at AML in a conference room for you. And yeah,
At AAMC.
AAMC. So it's the week of
So before AML
yeah,
starts.
before AML starts. So we'll get invitations out to you, and we would really like you to come and meet the vendor and take a look at the equipment if you could. It'll just be like, we anticipate an hour on Monday, November 14th. So we'll get that invitation out to you and would love for you to come and meet them.
And I believe you mentioned that the stakeholder group associated with this project is going to be there at some point.
And the
then
steering committee.
steering committee,
Right.
and then other clerks from other cities will have a chance to see the demo as
Mhm.
well. So you can all look at what we're up to. And that sort of feeds into this notion that we would like other jurisdictions to have the opportunity to use what we're acquiring, so we can spread the cost, they can use it. So see if we can't leverage it somewhere down the road.
You mean other jurisdictions in Alaska?
Yes, yes, exactly.
I think that, well, I mean, this might not be relevant for you, but I have heard rumblings about a vote by mail initiative in 2018 or 2020, statewide initiative. So it'd be great if we were ready. I mean, that means we wouldn't be 2020 or 2022 before it's actually happened, but anyway, I think it is in the future.
As you know, the clerks in the valley, and there's lots of jurisdictions out there. They've got the Matsu Borough, they've got Palmer, Wasilla, Houston. Am I forgetting anybody?
Probably, but we won't tell
Right.
them. Yeah.
And so,
Willow.
Tolkien is Matsu.
Willow, Sutton.
But those jurisdictions, I don't think have
Are they incorporated
city
and actually have
elect.
their, yeah.
So, but at least the 3 or 4 of those jurisdictions have their local election in October.
Yeah.
And so that would really be a good way for us to leverage the election center. Our election is in April. We'd invite them in to use it in October.
What about KPB? Are they?
Well, they have different issues because we are friends with the clerk down there. Don't they already have a partial by mail election?
They have 6 precincts that they run vote by mail.
Really? Great.
But I think the problem with them is that they tried to initiate a vote by mail, and with the voters defeated that, right? Is that
They've
so?
tried a couple times.
So if that sentiment still holds, that might not
Yeah.
bear fruit with them. So
But we are continuing our discussions and our partnership with the state, and I think you can report some more about that. I mean, obviously, Amanda, Dennis, all of us are working with them. Jackie has phone calls with them on different issues, and if it is a statewide initiative, I think we're still ready, and we're going to be ready.
certainly the software and hardware scale to handle the volume that the state would generate. Yeah. So
And the
that's-
location as well.
The location obviously is big enough to handle
It's in
that.
November, not April.
Exactly.
So if we were going to try to make a deal to use our equipment to count some of their ballots, would we have to have them design their vote by mail, or we would just be counting their absentee ballots, the ones that were mailed in, or?
Well, it depends on how far they go into this whole vote by mail concept. If they felt they needed help with just absentee in person or by mail, they already have a system for that set up. I don't know that they would necessarily come to us for help with that, but they might. And they might decide to move into our space, for example, just because they need more room or different space. But if they wanted to go full vote by mail, our hope would be that they would work with us so we could facilitate that for them, at least within our jurisdictions of the House and Senate districts. that have.
We don't think they're gonna actually be ready to do vote by mail completely before we are.
No.
Not possible,
But,
right.
but if, like Forrest says, if there's talk at the state level about doing vote by mail by
Right.
2020, then we're going to be positioned to be available to them. We hope
Right,
they
I'm
consider
just
that.
talking about trying to figure out some way to actually test our machines on
Oh.
some sort of ballots that are
Yeah.
cast before April.
I think we're looking for a local test before April 2018. I don't think we're looking for the state to participate before
Right,
then.
the state, they only have an election every 2 years, so they have this election in 16, we have one in 17, they don't have an election in 17.
Right.
So then we have ours in 18, and then they'd have midterms in 18. But I think Forrest is probably right. It would be it might be difficult if they haven't started now to be vote by mail by 18. But I think Forrest is right, by 20, they might be.
Right.
I personally, the issues that happened with the state this year up in Northwest Alaska, and I'm sure you are familiar with the cases, some of the issues concerned election workers, I'm not going to say the word, but there were discussions about election worker training, and the election workers admitted they're trained by video if they were. Is that right, Amanda, that they're video trained? Or if that?
Yeah, I'm not sure on the specifics. for
Right.
the
Well, I
different-
think the newspaper article said that someone admitted they had gotten no training.
So the issue then, and then, I admit I was very concerned about the Superior Court's decision that said it was malconduct. And that, of course, causes us, people who are responsible for elections, great concern,
Yeah.
because there are humans running this, and humans make mistakes.
Right.
And to raise that to the level, the mistakes and lack of training to the level of malconduct is very frightening. But I do think that as a result of that the understanding that voting by mail from a central location eliminates some of those problems. So I think the 2020 is probably a realistic date for the state to be looking at this issue. What would probably happen would be we'd have to have an MOU that details, what they do, what we do, and things like that.
No, I think Shungnak was a great data point for what can go wrong. I think the decision that the Superior Court judge wrote was a farce. He's probably a great guy, but that decision was completely mistaken, and that's why he got unanimously reversed by the Supreme Court. But regardless, I think you're absolutely right in everything you said about. It's funny, I've heard it from people on both sides of the political aisle about there's this perception that I think is mistaken that there's more voter fraud in the rural areas, and they're like, we need to, because of voter fraud. I don't think that's the case, but I think it's clear from things like Shungnak, you can see that it's just hard to find trained workers out there, and so you end up with a lot of just mistakes,
Right, I said, well, we've got lots of ballots, let's just pass them out to everybody.
Well, I was shocked that the Department of Elections didn't require them to have a training, but I mean, at the same time, they're desperate to get people. I was just I went to vote today, and there was a long line, and there's tons of volunteers there, and they're not getting, like tons of people working there, and it's all, not the stereotype, but it's mostly retired folks.
Well, we used to have a different type of primary. We used to have an open primary. So if they would have passed the ballots out to everyone, that would have been a problem.
Yeah.
But we have a closed primary now, and so if you hadn't worked at the primary election as an election worker in quite some time, you might have thought, well, we just pass out ballots to everybody gets the same ballot like they used to do in the old days.
Or having been an election worker during the primary election, I can tell you that it is very, very difficult to tell people based on their registration which ballot they have access to, and people don't like to hear that, and they will fight with you,
Hmm.
and it's a very uncomfortable situation. And I worked in 2010, 12, and 14 in the primary elections for the state of Alaska, and it is not a pleasant or comfortable situation to be in. And so I, as an election worker who has the experience, like I got yelled at. I got screamed at. I got told I was wrong, even though I had the facts in front of me. So it definitely creates situations for election workers and you're there by yourself. I mean, you're in a little isolated location and you're detached from the,
And it's your best friend or your neighbor or your cousin or if you're
Yeah.
in smaller
Right.
towns, you know.
Yeah, I can definitely see where there would be problems.
So I'm sorry we went off on that little tangent there regarding the equipment and working together with other jurisdictions. So I'll let Dennis get back to his report.
No worries, no worries. So with those two contracts coming together, that basically encumbers, assuming the assembly approves the big $500, that basically encumbers, $850,000 worth of the $1.077 million that was appropriated for the project. So that comes at the same time as the assembly's dealing with its budget. I know there was some discussion about this number coming up during assembly budget discussions. I think Amy mentioned that during the last week report I gave to the full assembly. The next contract in the queue is the lease space. So we have had counters to the counters and counters to the counters. And we just got a counter from them today. I think we're right there. We're looking at coming down. We went a couple different directions. We had originally proposed 103 a square foot, and we wanted tenant improvements. They came back with some estimates that were, what were they?
It was like-
150,000.
just-
So then,
75,000 for the entrance.
just for the ramp
Right.
and the automatic door. So,
Huh.
I can't remember if it was Barbara or Robin Ward reached out to Ski's shop, and he gave us a list of contractors that did work for him that he thought were reasonably priced and did good work. So we invited one of them to come meet with the owner and give the owner a bid for the improvements. And we did a walkthrough more specifically, which is something we didn't do with their first contractor that brought in bid. So I was there and I said, no, this is what I meant. And so that new bid came in at 50,000, 51,000, so substantially different. And then so we've agreed to that, but then they proposed to roll that into the lease, which would have meant that improvements actually cost us 150,000 over 3 years because they jacked up the lease price, lease rate. So I said, no, that doesn't work. So as of today, we're at our 103 and about 50 grand worth of tenant improvement.
What, those tenant improvements, will that come out of that original million, or is there another appropriation we'll have to make, or?
There isn't another pot of money at the moment, so my intention would be to appropriate, what am I saying? Our intention is to spend that out of the project fund.
Oh, out of the project fund?
Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
we have the project fund,
Yeah.
and does that leave you short somewhere else?
When we first came up with options for the project, we had given the assembly 3 cost options based on what we had heard from vendors on their likely bids. And we are at like 1.6 or 1.7 million down to the 1 point and change that you actually got appropriated. So when this project was originally set up, the money we were given was probably going to be short,
Uh-huh.
depending on where prices landed. So, and the lease space is going to cost more than we had hoped.
And we're gonna have to lease it for
We
longer?
wanted 3 years. So,
And when so I think you might have actually answered this in front of the assembly, so I apologize for repeating here, but we're pushing it out a year, but we're not signing the lease out a year?
Right.
Is that right?
That's
So-
right. Yeah, because we want to be able to get the equipment in there and use the space, figure out what issues the space might have, configure it.
Yeah.
If you did that all at once and try to run both of them out all at once, I think you're going to have more risks than if you move in now, use it, and then.
No, I think it's
you're ready
fine.
to
So
go.
it's what it is we won't be over the original cost estimate in the sense that we were said, $1 million for 3 years or whatever, but we'll just have a year less of being able to actually do vote by mail, which is too bad.
In that space, yes.
Yeah, 'cause we thought we
okay.
thought we were gonna start in 2017
Yeah.
with that million.
That's right.
We are gonna start in 2017, there's just not gonna be any ballots being processed.
Right, so in 3 years, we can either look for new space if the owner's offer is too high, right? Or try to negotiate something lower if our experience has been it should be changed, so.
Okay. And what's the monthly rate on that place?
It's something like 12, 13, it's gonna be, so it's 13,000 square feet, $1.03 a square foot, so it's gonna be 13,000.
13,000 a month.
Yep, and you're gonna have, on top of that,
50,000.
you're gonna have your utilities on top of that, janitorial, electric, heat.
Because those will be less expensive for us to pay, since we're only gonna be, right now, occupying the space for part of the year.
Uh-huh.
So we didn't wanna,
And we're not, I haven't got a chance to actually go down there, we're not actually occupying the whole building, is that right?
That's right,
Just a portion of the building.
the bottom of the building is a giant warehouse space, it's divided into like 7 bays,
Okay.
and we're only renting the one end.
Okay.
So what I'm anticipating is that the 2 main contracts in terms of the hardware and software, those are going to be capitalized expenses. And then your ongoing lease rate, that will become part of the operational budget. And that operational budget, depending on how your other leases are set up, is either housed in your budget or it's housed in real estate services. And it doesn't matter to me, I don't know how that all gets worked out, but
so as far as that goes, we have, I think the 150,000 or so is in, it may be in our operational budget for 17, and we'll use this money for that, but then in 18, we're gonna have to start budgeting for that, whether it's in ours or not. So there is gonna be a operational budget increase for the ongoing expense.
I see. So, I thought we were gonna be, we're bidding on 3 different types of machines. Is there one that is gonna be opening the envelopes? What's going on with that one?
So we had 3 different components. The third component is who prints and mails the ballots out. And so we don't, because we're not really doing that until April 2018, we're not putting out that RFP yet. We had it's drafted, it's largely ready to go. When we were on schedule, the only reason we were holding it was to make sure that the vendor who runs the envelopes and ballots and the vendor that mails and prints were on the same page in terms of ballot style, ballot size, envelope size, all those nitpicky components to make sure they are all compatible. But we really don't need to put that on the street until later. So I anticipate we would look at doing that early next summer, if not a little earlier, just to get it out there and score it and
Mhm,
get it
yeah.
ready and figure out what the cost is going to be.
Takes a lot more time than what we,
Yeah, it takes more time. So that one is in the queue, but it's not something that has to be done here in the immediate future. So that's the third piece. Yeah.
but those are the big expenses, the 3 RFPs in the lease space.
Yeah, another component with respect to lease spaces, there are some improvements that we need to make that are not part of the tenant improvements. Those are special improvements that we need to make to accommodate the systems. So for example, remember the columns, they had embedded outlet positions for power. And what we need to do now is work with these 2 vendors to identify which columns are we going to power, drop any networking cable that we need, so that from the server systems to the desktops, all of that's set up. So they provide some of the cabling, but they don't provide the initial power.
Right.
And they don't necessarily provide all the cabling, depending on how spread out we get.
Eric,
So
Mr. Croft has joined us.
late, sorry. And we have some security cages that we're going to set up, so it's basically chain link fencing on the floor. So there's those things that are going to come up that we have to figure out. And again, because we're not running this until April 2018, some of those acquisitions can wait. The powering and stuff like that we're using now, but some of the other stuff we can wait and do as we go along. So we'll try to work that with the owner and our own general contracting staff. what our budget looks like. Same thing with tables and all the supplies that you need to run those things all. Try to utilize whatever we can scrounge, you know, especially tables like this, these kind of tables, that's perfectly fine for a lot of
Those are our election tables.
yeah, so the stuff like that is, you need those kinds of things, and there's a lot of that around, we just need to.
So that's
Valuable,
what
it's just-
we're planning to use for sorting the ballots.
So, yeah, so for example, you have a big mail bag that comes in, it's got all these envelopes, right? Well, you need to put them all in the same order so the scanner reads the signature, it can't be upside down, right? And you want to make sure they're not damaged, clog up your system. So you need some table space, basically working space to do some of that. So there's same thing with the ballots. You open up the envelope, you spread the ballot out, make sure it's not so banged that you can't read it. Put them in the stacks, so you need tables for that. So pretty simplistic in terms of furniture needs. You need some chairs for the computer workstations. You need some tables, workstations, you need bins, racks, storage racks, things like that. That'll all come.
The low tax stuff.
The low tech stuff, exactly.
So the proposal for the lease is that it starts December 1st, and there's no charge for the rent or lease in December. And that is, although Amanda and Jackie and I are working on election things already, we have some time in December, and we're hoping to move the furniture that we have for elections that's in City Hall to the space in December. That's the plan. And then we'll be able to start some of the operations over there. I think Dennis had a very good comment that, you know, we might as well practice in the space, find out what works, what doesn't work, before we're trying to do a by mail election over there. So we'll figure out all the idiosyncrasies or what we need to change this year. And then next year, we'll be in a much better position just to run the by mail election. So we'll be in the space, you know, starting to move in at least in December, and then moving our operations over before the April 17 election.
And so when they're sending a representative up on Monday, November 14th, and so you're going to get information from him at that time on where the power.
Oh, we're actually doing all that right now.
Oh, you're doing
Yeah,
that now?
we're already working on those issues. What you're going to see at the clerk's conference is really a demonstration of the system.
Oh, okay.
That's really special for Dominion. They do the ballot tabulation, that's what you're going to see. They're doing that to reach out to other jurisdictions, and it's a good opportunity at the same time to show you guys what it looks like. So that's just one piece of the big picture.
Okay. All right.
So, let's see, we covered the 2 RFPs, the lease, the mail piece, the extras. So I think we can go here.
Right,
Unless
I
there's
think
something else.
Amanda and Jackie had a little update on some talking points and maybe on maybe the transition to vote by mail, some of the things that we're doing internally. Did you guys have something?
I made some notes,
Okay.
not necessarily for this meeting, but I think that they're applicable. Hang on, let me just find them.
Did you want to mention your
Yeah, I
talking
can
point?
Go ahead and go. Eric, specifically, we had talked at, I think it was the last meeting, about you had some concerns about the AccuVote machines and that you had been selling the case on vote by mail with the conversation that it's archaic election
Archaic,
equipment.
unreliable, yeah.
Yeah. And so I emailed this to you, but just sort of to repeat and for the record and everyone else to hear. We did change procedures last year in order to accommodate the challenges we perceived with the election equipment. We identified it when we did the ballot testing. So just to remind everyone, the procedures that we went through for the 2016 election, which we'll maintain in place for the 2017 election, we communicated at training some additional troubleshooting for our workers to go through with the AccuVote machines and how to identify pretty quickly where the errors are, and the errors are either happening with the memory cards There's a small battery inside the memory card. We have worked to replace all of them, but sometimes that doesn't work. And then the other problem is just we're having system failure on the machine. And so to identify really quickly what exactly is going on and to be able to communicate that right away to their field worker, so their field worker can make the arrangements to bring them either a new memory card or a new AccuVote machine. We hired additional field workers so that each field worker has less precincts that they're responsible for, and this is something that we've been doing over the years. After the 2012 election, our field workers were responsible for between 12 and 13 precincts. So when we had ballot shortage across the city, they weren't just running to a handful of precincts, they were trying to run ballots to 12 or 13 different precincts. And so we doubled the number of field workers after the 2012 election, and we've continued to increase it over the years because we recognize that the faster someone's able to respond to challenges, that it's better serves our voters, our workers, and everyone. Additionally, we, in the 2015 election, we recognized the need for a field worker specifically on site at City Hall that doesn't have any specific precincts, but that can just, like a runner who can do anything. And so we brought an extra person on this year because we recognized the challenges with the AccuVotes. We highlighted the areas in the manuals where it deals with the troubleshooting, and then we also made sure that we stressed the use of the emergency slot on the side of the black ballot box, which is secure and exactly the procedure that we should follow should there be either AccuVote or memory card issues. We did get a few phone calls on election day from folks concerned about putting their ballots in that side, but we were able to communicate to them that the workers were following the procedures and that their ballot was secure and that it was tabulated on election night at the end of closing polls procedures.
Are they supporting and maintaining the AccuVote machines? I mean, are there replacement parts for them and memory chips?
It's my understanding that the state, as of now, is not replacing them. They have no point at which they've identified that they're replacing them. When we did the ballot testing, we had a few machines that we had identified with problems, and we were able to take them back to the state, and the state was able to send them outside for repair. And when we have we have support from Dominion, which is the company that we use for
That's what I mean, not so much the state, but has even the manufacturer continued to support the product?
So we have election day support, and so we have a representative here that's able to knows all the tricks of the trade and talk our election workers through all the different little hacks and tricks that they can do to get it working.
They have not discontinued this product line.
I don't know the specific answer to that. I don't know if you can still buy one, but I know that we receive support for
They
the
still
machine.
support it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And Dominion is the vendor we're currently close to contracting with. Not that has been communicated to the other vendors at this point, but I don't recall any conversation with them where they make those. They have all new system setups. By and large, what they're doing, along with what some other vendors are doing, is they're shifting to commercially available scanners versus these specialized components, so that in this case, for example, both them and another vendor use a particular Canon scanner that you can find on the market anywhere. You can get them off Amazon if you wanted to, for example. So that's kind of the trend, is to get away from these specialized, specially built scanners and use these basically commercially available scanners.
That makes sense.
And to clarify, when I said hacks on the machine, I'm not talking about hacking into it for various reasons. I'm just saying.
You're talking about rubber bands and duct tape.
Like a MacGyver trick to get it working again. Since we're on the record.
Exactly.
And then Jackie, did you want to talk a little bit about our transition?
Yes, we are transitioning as we can in 2017. Kind of like looking at most of our processes and procedures and just getting a sense of how does this fit in with where we are going in the future, what can we change now so that workers and other people, voters can get used to the idea of change, get used to the idea of vote by mail, and so some of those things we have done. I think Amanda mentioned that we're getting our jargon down. We're trying to get the terminology down. How we're defining things that we're talking about, just by like changing the name absentee voting to you can opt in to vote by mail, for instance. And then we're also looking again at some of the procedures, like in the future we will probably need a group of people to work at a call center. And so we've been looking at this year in 2017 having at least one person trained as a call center person and then I'm working on a call center script for that person to work from. And that way we can sort of like do a beta test for a call center, try to keep some data, figure out what kind of calls we're mostly getting, about what the calls are about and how we can best answer them, and just learning as we go. And then we're just trying to do that with a lot of our procedures. We're changing the manuals to do some of that as well. So basically what we're doing is we're trying to look at what we're doing and how we can make it fit in with the context of a vote by mail election in a way that we are all getting some practice. And I don't know if I've made...
Well, no, I am very interested in that because it seems like a good idea to use whatever you can for practice. We talked about before, and maybe it's just entirely different types of ballots, but using the counting of absentee/vote by mail in this transition as a check on the counting of the other. Are they similar enough ballots that you could do that?
We can't run the same ballots across the new system,
That's what I was afraid of.
but when we get the new system, we basically get two setups in terms of test ballots that we can run. We get their factory configured ballots for their test, and then we can create our own election, the mini election. And we know, because we've, it's in a sense, voted the ballots, what to expect the machine to produce in terms of results. So we'll run that. And then, as Barbara was talking earlier, I don't, maybe you weren't here yet, but we're talking about some kind of election that we can run through the system as a practice for everybody, all the election workers, prior to April 2018. One idea was to run it through the schools for their Constitution Day in mid-September.
Oh, that'd be really neat.
So you could have a little mini contest, 2 or 3 races on the ballot, but on the ballot style, this machine is set up to run, and you could do it that way. Get them engaged in voting and give
It's a
the
really neat idea.
clerk's office a chance to use the system again.
And then if their class could come and watch if they wanted to,
Ooh,
the
great
machine.
Great idea,
Yeah.
Pete.
Sure.
I mean, because we might be able to actually, probably could even get news coverage for something like that. That would help get the word out about vote by mail. So, anything else? Do we want to go through this?
I think that's it from us.
I wouldn't say go through this in excruciating detail at this point, because I'm just handing it to you. On Monday, we talked in our meeting about building a matrix, which I've done for other code projects for the Assembly, where I have a spreadsheet that says, okay, in this code section, here's what we're changing, here's why. So you have a cheat sheet to run through.
Right.
That's not ready. We just talked about doing it on Monday, and I just started working on it. But this is a draft that I put together, and the clerk's office has looked through. We've talked about some things. There's some placeholder or conversation pieces that are marked in yellow. But by and large, it's ready for this committee to start talking about and figuring out how it wants to proceed in terms of how often do you want to talk about it, when do you want to talk about it, and then, assuming it's acceptable to you, pushing a draft to the Assembly for consideration.
So just, so this is the first time I guess I'd assumed we'd already adopted code and we had to back it up and then do it. This is the first code adaptation for vote by mail.
Sort of. When we rewrote the code back in 2013, I think it was, we put in some vote by mail for special elections, right? But a lot's changed since then, and now this really sort of accommodates what's the latest, greatest as far as we know. And what it tries to do is put in code without completely 100% replacing poll-based elections. So it's a little bit thicker than it might be in the future, because you might later on just strip out the poll-based stuff.
When was the vote to implement 2017?
But we did, I think maybe, we did change a section of code that says in the future, all elections will be,
Yeah. Yeah.
But we didn't do this.
Right.
We'd done a 13 pre-run at it,
Yeah.
but if we were still on the 17 schedule, we'd be doing this now anyway to do this kind of thing for
Exactly.
17 instead of 18.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, do you want to just go through maybe a couple of the
Sure.
yellow
Yeah,
highlighted
we can
things?
go-
And
so-
some of these are policy decisions that ultimately you will need to make?
So one of the things we've been looking at is trying to get some certainty in the ballot a little earlier, so that when you send out the ballots, all that process happens a little sooner than it does right now. So there's a little more time, because you're basically trying to open up voting 3 weeks before the actual election day. So one of the
Page
things we did,
5.
Page 5 at the top, we're backing up when candidates can withdraw from the elections. So they make that decision a week earlier than they would otherwise. So that can be incorporated in any changes to the ballot.
8 weeks instead of 7 on the regular elections.
Yes. Yep.
And we're asking you later in the, I think later that we're moving the candidate filing period earlier as well, and you'll see that later, in the draft. That would be coincide with the withdrawal period moves forward and the candidate filing moves forward. It's still in January.
Can we deal with those together? Where's that, the page on that?
Sure.
Because the next yellow I had wasn't on that issue. I just wanted to...
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn on that, but
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, Rob. I know you said that, but I don't know that I built in an earlier declaration date. If you look, the declaration of candidacy in 2833.
oh, it is. Okay, I could be mistaken then.
28, 30, 30? So what page?
That would be page
It would
4.
page 4. So I could be mistaken about that.
I know we talked about it, but I don't know. if
Right.
Well, that can be
Okay.
considered as another policy issue. So,
Yeah.
Barbara, your idea was they need to tell they need to tell us earlier, and if they're withdrawing earlier. But
Right. I was thinking that candidates filed, is it
I saw that.
how many days before the election? There you go.
Let's see. Filing for office opens right now on January 27th.
So
This year, so-
67 days before the election. And,
that's AMC to
3030C, which is not even.
and when is the last day when does filing close?
there it is. Withdraw. Last day to withdraw, according to the old schedule, will be February 14th.
And the filing date closes 4 days before that.
And which is how many days before the election?
53.
So it would have to change because you
Yeah.
can't withdraw.
Before the filing things,
Yeah.
you could, but it'd be really weird. Yeah.
We're happy when people do that.
Yeah.
So if you look at a calendar, Amanda, could you grab the January calendar? I just want to let you know as candidates that we don't think it would, and this is why we think this is important for you to have some input. You know, so this year, Amanda, the dates are
So right now it's got
the 27th through the
Oh,
10th,
for
right?
opening, you've got
27th is the,
Deadline?
this one that you can file for candidates
Opening.
here.
this one opens.
Opens.
Yeah.
And then it closes. You've got
Closes.
2 weeks basically to file.
And so we're just asking you to move it like to there, I believe.
But you could even widen it too. if you
Right,
wanted to.
right.
What's your
And,
sense of that for us?
and the reason is, if,
You have a sense that's that's tight?
Well, if that's what they've always done, then that's fine, the 2 weeks. I didn't realize it was that tight.
Right.
Um,
The state is
The state is up until, you can file for
Anytime.
months,
We don't do-
up
they don't do a
until
window,
June
right.
1st.
they do a up and a deadline.
Yeah, with a pretty wide, yeah.
And I think a lot of people file
You can file, because
beforehand,
that's right.
because your fundraising opportunity.
Right, so you can file, so that's right, there are different, you have to file with the state with APOC, and usually do an announcement or whatever, and then, yeah, but you can't file with the city officially until, yeah, later. It's
So,
fine,
and
if you're
I-
a serious candidate.
Can I would say too, for our office, I think like 2 weeks is a, it changes a lot of dynamics in our office when we're having the filing, folks coming in and stuff. It is nice to have it.
Disruptive.
You like a window.
I think a window is good.
It allows us to manage our work a little bit better. So, but remember, the way that the by-mail election is going to be, if this would be the election, would this be April, the election day, right here, the first
like it,
Tuesday?
April,
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have it here, but I need all three of these. So this is April 4th, this is the date of the election. If we were by mail, the ballots would be mailed here?
3 weeks before?
That's what we see most
That's what we're
other.
proposing, yeah.
Okay, so they'd be mailed here. So the dilemma for us then is if we don't have the filing for office ends here, withdrawal is here,
Right.
you know, Amanda is creating ballots, testing ballots,
Right.
you know.
Printing ballots.
You
and then
got it.
just mailing them, yeah.
You got it. It's so tight. And
Fine,
it
so-
doesn't allow for any error.
Right. All you're asking is to move the window back. You're not asking to actually shorten the window, so I think it's fine.
But it does raise up whether we wanted to modify it anyway. I don't have well, my
Yeah.
default would be that we just keep it the same, but we
Yeah.
can think
it's-
about that.
I think it's worked fine. I would just say, just do what they asked and push it back.
So let's go ahead and then
Move forward. I
include
wanted this guy, but-
moving the window back a week as Barbara predicted, but
or two even. It's fine.
what's the sense? So how tight, I mean, it really hasn't, candid on those, it's different that it's a window and you know it's a window and you know it's in January and you hit it. I guess I don't really care whether the window is from
Right.
13th to the 27th, 1 week up, 2 weeks up. Any strong feelings on whether you give yourself an extra week in this?
I mean, I
of
guess
printing and doing?
I guess the one counter argument I could say is some people don't decide to run for office until very late, and so they'll say, well, this is going to force maybe I would have filed, but what I mean, like I would have filed. It had been when is that now? Like beginning of February. Right. Okay. So if I would have filed then, and you're taking away 2 weeks for me to make a decision over something to happen that would encourage me to run. But the counter argument to that is the state makes you file in June. The election's not until November.
Right.
So we actually allow you to be
Be a
much
pretty
more
late
last
decider,
minute than they
right.
do. So I don't think it's a horrible violation of democracy or what have you.
Yeah. And I think Amanda can speak to this really well in terms of what this window does to her right now. It really jams her up in terms of closing candidacies here,
Yeah.
developing the ballot in here, getting it to the printer for proofing, get a return proof back so you can be ready for absentee vote by mail. So really, it's always been tight.
Right.
So the idea was, let's take the opportunity to move this at least a week.
So that's the question. So we're sitting at 27 to 10, and we all agreed 2 weeks is about right, or for want of a better reason, change it. Do we just move to 20 to 3, January 20 to February 3, or do we move to January 13th, January 27th?
Like this or like this. There's 2 weeks, there's 3 weeks.
Do you guys have a strong preference?
I would say to just move it the 1 week because it would be less jarring, for all these other
Right.
things that we've discussed.
Yeah, except that the people that are jarred by this are a very, very tiny minority of people, most of whom are not normal people. I can attest, like myself and Mr. Croft, and we know damn well when those
Yeah.
filing deadlines are. Pay people to know when those.
I think that was the nicest
deadlines are.
insult I've ever heard.
And, one of the things that Amanda and Dennis and I have done, as we have amended the elections code over the years, is we've done incremental changes rather than big changes. So I wonder if we should do the 1 week now, but that if you would be open to revisiting that, and we'll run our first by mail election.
Sure.
And we'll do our practice by mail election, and we'll test those dates. If it's not enough, we'll be back.
Is it the case that we're moving out to December now when it's we're moving to 2018 when it's a mayoral election. Is it the case that mayoral elections are simpler than assembly elections? There's going to be a lot less candidates on the
Fewer.
ballot.
Fewer ballot styles. But it's a higher
Maybe less too,
turnout.
but
I think it might be less.
So I think it's a little bit of both, isn't it, Amanda?
Less ballot styles, but still a lot of different ballot styles because the
LRSAs and stuff.
and the park, fire, police, road, service areas.
Yeah. But in this case, at least, the filing stuff, you have a lot less candidates to sort of manage the case.
Not specifically because I think we get, for assembly seats, we typically get 1, 2, 3 candidates.
Right.
For mayoral contests, I mean, it's
13 years.
I mean, a baker's dozen. So, but, and it is slightly different than the assembly. Just there's more.
careful.
What?
There's like more. There's more engagement. I mean, we have higher
Oh, the
turnout.
mayoral?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. Sure. It's like a midterm versus a presidential.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are going to have to make sure that the vendor that we choose to print our vote by mail ballots has got the capability of printing a large number of them.
Yeah.
Right now, when we're printing absentee ballots, we only are expecting, 10 or 15 or 20% at the most to vote.
We currently
early.
print over 70,000%. 70% of registered voters. So we would be printing more because we're going to print a ballot for every registered voter. And then we might have to, depending on what decisions we make for the accessible vote centers, if we have ballot on demand, or if we have to have ballots printed for there too. So there will be more ballots printed. In addition to printing the ballot, the printer will also need to be able to provide envelope, security sleeve, instruction sheet.
So you print now, you way overprint, just because you can't be under. So you way,
agree.
kind of you're gonna be, but you never want to be in the situation where something gets exciting and you don't have it, right?
2012 haunts me
Yeah.
on the day.
Well, I think it's a little rational, just so when I explain to people, we know we're overprinting for any but the wildest election,
I will
and we
s-
do.
Yeah.
So municipal code requires us to print 70% of registered voters. We have, in the last 4 years, really drilled down on the ballot order and been able to identify specifically where the voter turnout is happening. And I will say that having learned the ballot order over the last couple of years, I can understand where things went wrong in 2012, because when you have 40 different ballot styles and you have 13 different ballots in one precinct, assumptions were made about how many ballots you would need of each one. And so worked really closely with Tina Miller at AWU and the GIS department, and we've been able to drill down and identify specifically how many people live in this little plot of land, and that's how many ballot style number 10 that I need. And so we order more, but we have a more accurate ballot order.
So you're going to print more ballots because you're going to hit every eligible registered voter. But in addition to that, we need some time built in because you have to mail them. So you've got to have some time for the mail to actually happen and get to somebody's house in time for what we're trying to accomplish.
And the other thing that we're butting up against additionally is the 30-day voter deadline too, which actually happens in March. So you have to be eligible to vote in the election, and you have to register 30 days before. So there is like this little gap right as we're preparing everything where we then go back and look at the numbers because we've gotten some new registered voters and stuff like that.
Do we want the state to change it as it applies to municipal elections?
No.
Okay, well,
I think 30 days is hard. I mean, there's 30 days where if you move anywhere in Anchorage, you potentially can't vote on issues. I just like.
Well, I
voted
just
for my
some-
first election in Minnesota, so I like same day.
sometimes in your urge for compliance, you forget that we can ask for and even sometimes get changes out of even this crew that makes sense. So I just, a lot of what you have to do is meeting all these right criteria, but sometimes if it causes a problem, you can say this particular thing doesn't work now that we do this change, and we want you to change it. But maybe that's not one. So real quick, it creates what tightness? So it should, I guess. So by March
5th is the
Yeah,
30-day
right.
deadline. So
And
that,
she's mailing here.
When do PSP
So,
applications due?
so we've got,
March 31st.
the state, if you register by here, the state is processing those voter registrations here. But later in the edits here, it tells you that we're using a voter registration list that's not older than 90 days. And so then, we'll have to go back and pick up those voters.
Wait
that
a minute.
that long.
Rule them out of order, Pete. Get them back in line.
So, just to explain, so my understanding is a lot of jurisdictions, what happens is they use a voter registration database drop for the big mail out, but they know there's going to be an update.
That's what I was going to ask.
And that-
Can't we do and here's now, they're a little later. Do you do that in here?
So my understanding is a lot of jurisdictions, they do the updated mailing in-house, and then you can speak to this too, where you have a mail house do the big one, but you may have an update that you do in-house depending on whether you set to do that. Because it might be just a couple hundred.
I mean, I'm curious about your point too. I just wanted to hear it, right? So on this, just to finish do you have you shall mail out by that date, except you can do a supplemental that catches you up for new, because that would be the most efficient way to do it, right? Do the big one that hasn't changed, and then get your updated one and do a small one.
It's right here, it's the next, it's on the bottom of page 5, the page that we're on. And it talks about voting by mail, and the clerk is going to assure that there's a ballot available, and then it goes on to the next page. So we've got a window there for that database.
Yeah. And then if you look at page 7, it talks about preparation and distribution, and what we've written there right now is placeholders that for a regular election, the printed ballots shall be in possession 21 days before. And so we need to talk about, is that the right time?
I'm sorry, did you have something for us?
My question is, so if we're mailing out to someone who's in the military stationed overseas, when do we mail those out now? And because they need more time, time to get there and time to get back. So do we have is there going to be a shorter window for overseas ballots being mailed when we go to vote by mail than there is now, or how are we going to handle that?
I don't know the answer to that, and I think that we're going to have to look into that and get back to you.
Yeah, there's no intention to shorten the window.
No, I was going to say that would probably not be a good idea.
Yeah.
But, depending on what part of the world some of these service people are, the mail doesn't get there real quickly. So,
And we do have electronic voting, so people can vote by fax or email. And that is another option for people who are overseas.
So right now, C on page 7 is the municipal clerk shall cause an official ballot to be mailed to an eligible voter at least 21 days before the election date. And so that is generally a good obligation, except in the situation that you're talking about, for want of a better, right? Shit that has changed in the last 30, in February of that year. So the update you're getting, Amanda, I'm getting ready. So if it's there, 1, 2, 3, you've got to do it by the 13th.
Right.
March 13th, this says you've got to send it out. And if they can change up to this date, then the state probably didn't get you the revised one until Wednesday, even if they're doing,
So,
right?
well, and that's, I will say that I'm okay with the 30 days. Part of the challenge is the state law does say that if they receive it in the office, so I actually usually don't get the final list until, I think, this day.
And you mail in here.
Yeah.
Well, so how does that?
But I would say that we would probably do the bulk, and then, I mean, it's not like 200,000 people all moved, it's maybe 1,000.
But you don't know which ones. So you've got a mailing list that some is false positives and some false negatives, right? You've got some that you need to take off and some you need to add.
Right, so the RFP for the mailing vendor isn't out yet and won't go out until later next year. So in the requirements, their system has to be able to ingest updates. And when we've talked to the vendors, they have systems in place for tracking these changes.
So it's really not that big a problem in the sense that the raw number is not changing very much. And it's okay to give them an updated list there when you just get it?
So what can happen is that the mail house, one way to set this up is that the mail house has an obligation to update their record, mail a new ballot to the voter, and then that is put into the election system so that the election system knows which envelope it's going to process. So it's not processing the wrong ballot for that voter.
So some voters may actually get two ballots, one where they used to live in their old district and one where they just recently moved and re-registered for.
It's possible, depending on how we time this in terms of getting information from the voter, how we set this up with the mail house vendor.
Because the ballot envelope, the packet that they get, we get those back and then we have to relabel them. The post office doesn't forward those, is my understanding. We don't
set it up now that they don't forward it, but that will be a decision we'll make with the mail house and the post office.
And this is the same procedure for absentee, right? So you're just doing this now, but on a much smaller scale.
It's different for absentee. So absentee is all people who've requested it.
And that list you have by definition.
We create that list by putting it into an Excel spreadsheet.
It's really that small.
I mean, it's like 3,000 people, so
But-
it is.
Let's say you get an application, but then that person moves and you get an updated record. I think that's maybe where you wrote your question.
We track that
Mhm.
in a manual way.
And it's considered a question to absentee ballot, and we resolve those questions manually.
But we don't usually have that scenario. Usually what we have is someone fills out an application and sends it in, and then they receive one from the political parties that send it out and send that to, and then they don't get their ballots, and then they send in a third one. Usually we just get, and there's it's the same people that are the offenders every year, and I know because I'm the one that's going through and then paying back off the list.
So right now you have this, let's say you get this situation where you have a ballot that the voter shouldn't have voted some of the races because they're moved, right? So the election officials basically take, if I remember right, take the ballot that should have, translate the votes that should be counted, and then that gets run to the scanner. So the idea in the future is that you won't have that manual process of copying over just the votes that are supposed to be counted. That there are other systems in place, either to make sure you get the right ballot, because the other ballot's pulled out because they shouldn't have voted that one, and they received two in the mail. Or you can adjudicate it online in the system versus having to manually translate votes across.
And in general, we might have less of these challenges if the PFD voter initiative passes, because it will update people's, so when I just scolded a friend downstairs who was voting, couldn't vote an early vote because he moved, and I was like, oh, you didn't update your stuff. And he's like, is this a lot of extra work? It's like,
Yeah.
There was a woman, actually it was funny, I was in line today, and there was a woman walking up and down the line from the Division of Elections saying, I've got forms to update your voter, like, where are you registered to vote, you know?
But if you move in November and you fill out your PFD January 1st, like most Alaskans do, then we'll get that information. And we would, I mean, I think that stuff like that can cut down on question voters and these challenges.
So here's a fundamental question, we'll move off this. Is there any sufficient tension between the laudable 21 days before you'll have your ballot and the state law 30 days, so that 9-day window that you've got between when people can change information, how long it takes the state to do it, and of course you want to have the ballots in your hand with a sufficient time to exercise that right. Do you people as the experts want to move either one of those dates, or are you telling us the 9 days is enough to get your stuff done?
I don't want to move either one of the dates because it's a fraction of people that have these differences. I don't want to, for that small fraction.
Well, that's another way of saying I can handle it. I can handle that 9-day window.
We got this.
In
Okay.
fact, I think we'd even go farther than that and say that, you know, our mission in the election division is that every vote counts. And if your vote doesn't count because you weren't registered in time, it's to some degree a problem with our mission. So, as Amanda mentioned, Minnesota has same-day voter registration. And I don't think we'd be opposed to that because it means more voters are engaged. If something happens that they decide they're interested in voting between that 30-day window. So yes, not only can we handle this,
We
you
can
could
handle more.
there you go.
Okay, got it. That's cool.
But
All right.
it's,
So I have one other thing I'd just like to point out on page 6. It's another big policy decision that we're going to ask you to make. And we need you to know that we think that there are lots of undeliverables in the database. And we don't want to, I think the cost, we're looking at $1.50 a ballot package. Is that about right, Amanda? And we don't want to have to mail to those. We want to hang on to them. The state knows who's undeliverable. We just want to hold them. If they come to vote at one of the accessible vote centers, we'll get them a ballot. But we want to save
But
them.
PFD voter, nobody's going to have an undeliverable PFD thing, are they? I mean, if that passes, aren't you going to get rid of all those?
I don't know the specifics, but I think that is going to help in a lot of areas, and especially because, so people have their addresses in the state voter registration database as like mile 10 of this road, and addressing has since gone in and given them a specific house address, and the state of Alaska has sent them letters asking them to update, but the state can't go in and change it until that voter says. But if the voter puts on their PFD their new address, I think that's going to eliminate a lot of those problems. And I'm looking at Forrest because I'm hoping he can confirm my.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some people that still will put mile 10 or whatever because they get their PFD direct deposited, so they're not so worried about them being actually mailed a PFD check. But in general, people are strangely accurate in saying where they live when it's $1,000 on the line. So yeah.
But aren't there numerous people who get their mail at the Brother Francis Shelter or some other social service agency like that because they're outdoors?
And
so
there's
to
people
speak?
that are registered to vote there too. And so we'll be able to address those concerns too as they come up.
And in addition to the PFD voter initiative, you may have noticed that the Division of Elections entered into that compact with Eric with the other states. And so what that means is that someone who's registered in another state is getting pulled out of our database. So again, that's going to also eliminate some of those undeliverables. So
Do you send the Brother Snatches ones?
Well, we don't currently have people who request absentee ballots to the Brother Francis Shelter.
Right, so what are you going to do in the new system when it's Brother Francis?
Well, if that's where they're registered to vote. I mean, people receive mail at Brother
You can say
Francis.
yes or
and
yeah, okay.
Thanksgiving.
Don't have to justify it yet. We're going to send it to her, to them.
So,
at the end.
you said this
That's
is a
where a
big,
voter is registered,
you said
yeah.
this is a big policy, Carl. Are there other jurisdictions that don't do this?
I don't remember.
I think so.
That they don't do this?
They send
They
it
do
to
this or
where-
they don't do
They
this?
don't send undeliverable.
Right, okay.
Right.
That's what I meant. So this, what you're asking for here is standard practice in other jurisdictions that do vote by mail?
So
I don't know the percentage, but yes.
what's the percentage of, that would be undeliverable? Are we talking 0.5%? We talking 1/10%? I mean.
We would
anybody
have to
any
get
idea?
back to you on the
Right.
that number.
And it's not like those people can't vote. It just means they won't get a ballot, and then they'd be like, hey, my ballot didn't show up. And they either reach out to you or they go to a vote center and vote in person.
And it would be a great opportunity if they reached out to us for us to update that undeliverable status. I think we would look forward to those opportunities.
Great. All right, I need to go.
Yep.
All right, well, I think we'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you. We'll have another one fourth Wednesday of next month.
Okay, so in between now and then, if you happen to look through this, let me know. I will expect to do a more thorough overview at that meeting and be thinking about how you want to proceed.
Fourth Wednesday is the 23rd. We're really doing that?
Day before, I think it's the day before.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can look into scheduling it at a different time.
We'll have to check into that.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not going
can-
anywhere.
I'm going to be hunting, but
I'm sure I'll be here. So in those on November 14th, if you want to see a demonstration, that's going to be here at City Hall.
And we'll
Kevin,
send out an
cool.
email.
We'll send an invitation
Oh, so the
to
Captain Cook.
everybody. Right.
And
And
so-
then, just so you know, we have an executive steering committee meeting with the Vote by Mail Executive Steering Committee tomorrow. It's just a regular update for that group.
What time is that meeting?
11 to noon.
All right, well, our Community and Economic Development Committee gets it done in time. I think
Okay,
it'll work for that.
great, that sounds good.
All right, we're adjourned.